It's a great honor and pleasure for us to have you here. We thank you for accepting our invitation, for being a keynote speaker at our conference. Θα πω στα ελληνικά κάποια λόγια για την κυρία Πικάρ. Η κυρία Πικάρ αυτή τη στιγμή είναι καθηγήτρια της Αναπτυξιακής Ψυχολογίας στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Aix-en-Provence στη Μασσαλία. Το 2001 ήταν επίκορη καθηγήτρια στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Μομπελιέ. Το 2008 ήταν καθηγήτρια στην Τουλούζη. Έχει ένα τελείωτο βιογραφικό, απλώς να σταθώ σε ένα σημείο το οποίο θεωρώ πάρα πολύ σημαντικό, ότι από το 2009 μέχρι το 2014 υπήρξε μέλος του French University Institute, όπου μετά από πολύ σκληρή επιλογή υπήρξε μία από τις καλύτερες ερευνήτριες στη Γαλλία και έλαβε χρηματοδότηση για 5 χρόνια για έρευνα. Να πω λίγο για τα ερευνητικά της ενδιαφέροντα. Τα ερευνητικά της ενδιαφέροντα εστιάζονται στην ανάπτυξη της σχεδιαστικής συμπεριφοράς των παιδιών, δίνοντας έμφαση τόσο στη συμβολική όσο και στη γραφοκινητική της διάσταση. Στην ανάπτυξη της αντίληψης απτικής ικανότητας σε παιδιά και ενήλικες τυπικής και μη τυπικής ανάπτυξης, μελετά τον τρόπο με τον οποίο χρησιμοποιούν την αφή και την κοιναίσθηση για την αντίληψη των αντικειμένων και των ιδιωτήτων τους. Τους γνωστικούς και κοινωνικούς παράγοντες που εμπλέκονται στις διατροφικές αποστροφές των παιδιών, στην ανάδυση της κοινωνικής νόησης σε παιδιά ηλικίας 6 μέχρι 24 μηνών. Δεν θα μπω σε λεπτομέρειες για το ερευνητικό της έργο, ξαναλέω, είναι τεράστιο. Απλώς έτσι λίγο μόνο να επισημάνω ότι η κυρία Πικάρ έχει δημοσιεύσει στα καλύτερα περιοδικά του χώρου, όπως είναι το Journal of Personality Assessment, το British Journal of Developmental Psychology, το Letterality, το Journal of Non-Verbal Behavior, το Journal of Experimental Child Psychology. Ας μείνουμε εδώ, γιατί ξαναλέω ότι το ερευνητικό της έργο είναι τεράστιο. Θέλω να μην αργήσω να της δώσω το λόγο. Madame Picard, je vous donne la parole.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Yes? Okay. So, first of all, I would like to say my warm thanks to Professor Bonotti. Thank you very much. Also to the organization committee. It's a hard work to organize such a conference. To the Hellenic Psychological Society and the University of Thessaly. So thank you for your invitation to this conference. It's a great honor for me and Efraistopoli. Well, this is the outline of my talk. First, I will say some preliminary words about drawing. Then I will ask whether children's drawing are realistic copies of objects. Third, I will defend the view that drawing is a non-verbal language. And I will end with some short concluding remarks. So, some preliminary words about drawing. First question to ask is, what is drawing? How can we define it? I would say that drawing is a graphomotor activity, but it is also a cognitive system that permits the graphic expression of concepts. In other words, drawing conveys concepts through external notation. Drawing has the characteristic of being symbolic and intentional. It is also ludic and social and typical of childhood. There are two different and opposite views on drawing behavior. The first view comes from Lequet, who states that drawing is realistic, that is, it aims to represent what is seen. The second view is shared by contemporary researchers like Baldi and Cohn, who both state that drawing is a learned language based on conventional graphic signatures and codes. In this talk, I will try to defend the second view. So, next question is, how can we study drawing? Well, there are at least 3 different levels of analysis. The first level is the semantic level, or what we may call the what of drawing, that is the graphic product. The second level is the syntactic level, or what we may call the how of drawing, or the online graphic process. The third level is the cinematic level, which refers to the mechanics of the drawing movement. such as velocity or pressure exerted on pen. Of course, these three levels are interconnected, and it is possible to analyze the interplay between each levels, as well as to analyze each of them separately. Final question to ask about drawing: why should we study drawing? Well, I would say that there are at least two main reasons. The first is that drawing is specific to the human mind. As stated by Carmelo Smith, many spaces generate internal representation, but there is something special about the architecture of the human mind that enables children and adults also to produce external notations, that is, to use cultural tools for leaving an intentional trace of their communicative and cognitive acts. The second main reason is that drawing is a core function of human cognition. As stated by Cohn, humans do seem to have an innate capacity for representing concepts graphically. Drawing is as essential to human cognition as other core functions, like verbal or manual linguistic systems. It is another avenue for conveying concepts, and its study is embedded into the understanding of human communication, human cognition, and human nature. Recently, I looked at the paper that have been published on drawing in order to get an overview of the current research thematic on this domain. To that end, I searched in databases for scientific publication that included the word drawing in the title over the last 3 years period. I found a total of 128 papers. Here you can see on the table how this paper distributes by publishing continent and thematic. First, with respect to thematics, we can see that the major part of the papers were concerned with pathologies and the mechanisms of drawing. Pathologies included mostly Williams syndrome, autism, and Alzheimer's disease. Mechanisms of drawing concern brain mechanism, cognitive mechanism, and perceptual motor mechanisms. By contrast, only a minor part of the drawing were concerned with projection, that is, drawing as a projective mean of personality or feeling, and education or learning issue. Second, you can see that drawing research is not American research. Indeed, Europe is the first publishing continent in the domain. Now, I move to the first main part of the talk, which concern the question of whether children's drawings are realistic copies of objects. Well, this is the common view, because along the line of Lequet, we have considered that when children draw, they try to copy reality the best they can. Lequet has described 4 stages of drawing development that concur to a higher level of visual realism. The first stage is called fortuitous realism, because as you can see, the child only produces scribbles to depict reality. The second stage is called failed realism, because as you can see, the drawing is still imperfect. There are missing features and there are connection errors. The next stage is called intellectual realism. In this stage, drawing draw what they know about reality. For instance, they can draw legs and a belly button transparent behind a shirt. We also call these drawing object-centered drawings. Finally, the stage of visual realism is attained when children draw only what they see of reality. And they produce what we call view-centered drawings. So, according to Lequet, drawing development is a long struggle toward visual realism. I will defend the view that drawings are not and cannot be visually realistic. The first reason is that similarity between reality and drawing is low and conventional. As illustrated on the leftmost picture, similarity is low, and this is fortunate for some men. Also, familiar graphic signifiers like the earth, the sun, or the human body are conventional symbols, but they are very far away from their reference. Between a real heart with blood and a symbol of love, there is a gap. Finally, when we look at drawing made by children, for instance, drawing of a cat, and real cats, as you can see on the photographs, we may wonder whether cats have a shape that can be drawn. Instead, we may argue that drawing a cat is just using conventional symbols rather than copying the real animal. To illustrate the conventional similarity between drawing and reality, let's look at different ways to draw a human figure. All of these are human figure drawing, but they are quite different from the European style. For instance, the Jimmy contour, the first example, are produced by children who are living in a small village called Jimmy in Papua New Guinea. This culture has no graphic tradition, and the drawing has a reverse U shape. Second example, the half-moon faces were observed by Wilson and Wilson in children living in small village in Egypt. Again, drawing a round face or a half-moon face is a matter of convention. Finally, third example, the horseshoe observed by Cox in Aboriginal children living in Australia. These children draw top views of human beings seated next to a fire, and they draw them as a horseshoe. What is interesting to note here, and you can see it on the rightmost picture, when children go to school, they learn the Western style, and in their drawing, you can see a mix of Western style human figures and their own style horseshoe. So in some sense, we can say that drawing have learned two conventions and they have become bilingual. Second reason is that when we draw an object, we don't see what it is as a retinal picture, but what we know about it as a mental construct. For instance, Lee has shown that errors in copying line drawings of a table were directly related to the knowledge that the lines represent a table, and not to the difficulty of drawing the lines themselves. Indeed, when the same component parts were copied by children without the knowledge that they represent a table, children were able to copy accurately the component parts. So, we usually draw according to what we know about objects, and our conceptual knowledge interferes with our drawing production. Third reason is that drawing are sometimes object-centered, sometimes view-centered, and this depends highly on the context. Object-centered drawing are typically produced when children are asked to copy objects with hidden features, like a cup of coffee with its handle turned out of sight. As Freeman and Jenny Kuhn have shown, young children usually include the handle in their drawing because their canonical model of the object has a handle to the right. So these children make a canonical hero. They draw what they know and not what they see. Well, different studies have shown that the picture was not so clear-cut because there is a very high contextual permeability of the drawing behavior. Some context can trigger view-specific drawing even in very young children. For instance, pairs of objects, as you can see here, to a cup of coffee, where you have a clear visual contrast, a better wording of instruction, or the presence of a communication game can all lead to the production of view-specific drawing in children. Some years ago, we asked children aged 4, 5, and 6 years to copy a model of a saucepan in two atypical views. One view was the back view. The handle was turned out of sight. The other view was the front view. You can see the handle, but it has a strange shape. we observed that only a few of the children were able to produce view-specific drawings. As you can see on the figure, in the white bars, view-specific drawings were quite never produced for the front view, and for the back view, their frequency of occurrence increased slowly with age. Now, if you look at the black bars, you can see that part of the children made the so-called canonical heroes. That is to say, they ignore the model and drew the object as usual, with the handle turned to the right. What is interesting in this study is that we observe that part of the children produce non-canonical heroes, that is, heroes of copy for which children neither draw the canonical model nor the model shown by the experimenter. In these cases, they draw top views of the objects. For instance, for the back view, they draw the handle at the top, and for the front view, they draw the handle at the bottom. So what we show here, in other words, is that children draw in between what they know and what they see. Well, the fourth and final reason is that only extraordinary people can draw visually realistic drawing. One example is Nadia. It's a well-known case of an autistic child who does not speak verbal language, but she has developed an extraordinary skill in drawing, and especially in drawing horses in movement. Another example can be given with Stephen Wilshire, called the human camera, who is able to draw and paint very detailed cityscapes. In both cases, it seems that this visual realism is due to a specific functioning of the brain, who processes reality as a retinal picture and not as a mental construct. So, I will move to the third part of the talk, where I consider drawing as a non-verbal language. Well, this is the alternative view, which posits that when children draw, they don't try to accurately copy or represent the way things look in the world. Instead, they learn to draw by imitating the graphic schemas that are available in their culture. We are so used to read pictures and to make sense of pictures that we have forgotten that making sense of these graphic languages is not natural. It has to be learned. It requires learning the relation between the graphic signatures and their reference. For some people, the left picture, where you can see Alice with an animal who is smoking and is on a mushroom, the picture is quite complex. There is occlusion. Well, for some people, this picture may be as complex as the right picture, where you have Chinese symbols. What I mean is that if you don't have the code, you don't understand. Well, in the perspective of drawing as a language, first thing important is that from a developmental point of view, we can consider that the graphic signatures come from scribbling, like words of language come from babbling. Drawing evolves from scribble to basic shapes and line, what we call the graphic repertoire or the graphic lexicon. We consider that this graphic lexicon includes around 30 units by the age of 6. Of course, with age, it will increase in size. This lexicon offers the possibility to build constructional drawing from a combination of basic shapes and line. As you can see on the rightmost picture, many different drawings can be constructed from a symbol combination of polysemantic graphic signatures, like circles, dots, and lines, or square and triangles. We say that these signifiers are polysemantic because they can carry different meanings. For instance, the same cycle can be used for a flower, it can be used for the sun, it can be used for the head, and so on. After this constructional drawing becomes more stylized, and it is mostly inspired by the cultural models. Second point, when children learn to draw, they do it by studying the graphic pictures in their environment. According to Cohn, the process of drawing development involves acquiring and producing graphic schemas, just as the acquisition of language involves acquiring the lexicon and grammar in a child's environment. He also argued that drawing development involves the acquisition of schema through imitation. Well, imitation is an important process because, and this position is interesting because it can explain differences in graphic fluency observed between cultures, and it also explains differences in drop-off in drawing development. I will illustrate them in the next slide. So first, to illustrate differences in graphic fluency across cultures, there is an interesting study by Anderson and Anderson with Imba people who live in Namibia. These people live in a very rural environment with no picture or drawing and with little influence from the Western culture. 9 of these people were asked to produce first ever drawings of themselves and of animals. The author reports that 4 people produced only scribbles. The other 5 drew very schematic pictures. For instance, as you can see on the illustration, a man aged 25 years old drew animals on the right side of the page. He said he drew a lizard, an hippopotamus, and a crocodile. And on the left side, he drew 2 human figures. What is remarkable here is the simplicity of the drawing and their similarity. Similarity because you have the same shapes and lines, and the same use of the horizontal position, which look rather strange for the human body. Thus, this study showed that drawing by preliterate people is not impossible, but without models to imitate, drawing behavior remains poor. By contrast, some cultures provide very stimulating context, or even directive context for drawing activity. A recent study by Hunzinger and colleagues compared drawing by Chinese children living in America and European American children. This comparison is interesting because the 2 cultures have very different views on art instruction. The Chinese view is that drawing must be taught and that creativity will emerge after children have been taught essential drawing skills. The American view is that children's drawing skill emerge naturally. There is no need to direct the activity. It's a natural tendency. And a direct teaching will diminish their drawing skill and creativity. In this study, children were asked to draw a person 3 times. It's a longitudinal study. And their drawings were rated for both drawing skills, using scores obtained at the Draw a Person test, which is a classical test for drawing human figures, and they were scored for creativity, which was broadly defined as the inclusion of novel or unusual elements in the drawing. As you can see on the figures, the Chinese children outperform their European peers both on drawing skill and drawing creativity. And this was true at time 1, time 2, and time 3 of the studies. So what we see here is that contrary to the traditional belief that imitation limits children's creativity, this work suggests that imitation actually fosters creativity for drawing. Last, there are some differences in drop-off in drawing development. A Greek study by Bonotti and Metalidou has investigated children's judgments and feeling about their own drawing from the age of 4 to the age of 12. And they found a gradual decrease in the liking of the drawing with age. In England, Rose and colleagues have also shown that occupation and enjoyment in drawing decline with age. Similarly, in France, Baldi has shown that drawing often disappears at the entrance of adolescence, where there is no further improvement in graphomotor capabilities. Interestingly, this drop-off in drawing development is not observed in Japanese children. So why? Well, according to Tokyo, comics provide Japanese children with a consistent visual vocabulary to imitate. As a result, these children have a greater proficiency in drawing than American children, and they show an absence of drop-off in drawing development. Thus, imitation of external models for drawing is a very important process for drawing development itself. Well, in the perspective of drawing as a language, third important thing is that children's drawing are shaped by cultural habits in reading and writing verbal language. So there is a connection between graphic language and verbal language. On the one hand, we know that the drawing of familiar objects involve preferred profile of directionality. In one of my studies with French children, I found that the left profile was typical of the right-handed children. These children start drawing on the left side of the page with the most important feature, for instance, the head of the animal instead of the tail. So they start left with the head, and they go from left to right. As a result, the drawing is in a left profile. This profile is congruent with their reading-writing habits, which are from left to right. We also know that drawing one object behind another is governed by different graphic rules. As illustrated in the Greek study by Vlachos and Bonotti, children may use 4 different strategies to draw a tree in front of a house. These are illustrated in the right picture, and they are ranked by order of complexity. The first is separation, the simpler strategy, and the last one is partial occlusion, the more complex. Well, the second strategy is interesting. It is called the vertical oblique strategy. As you can see in this strategy, children draw the front object on the left side of the page, and the far object is drawn on the right side, but in the top of the page. So again, the vertical oblique rule is congruent with left to right reading habits. Now, what happens when the reading-writing habits are different? Well, a study by Kebe and Vanter has shown that drawing directionality varies according to cultural reading habits. In this study, French children with left to right reading habits and Syrian children with right to left reading habits produce familiar objects in profile. For instance, they were asked to draw a car, an airplane, or a face. A directionality index was measured as the difference between the number of right drawing and the number of left drawing. So if the index is positive, this means that children use a right profile. If the index is negative, this means that children use a left profile. And if the index is 0, it means that there is no preference. So if we look at the results, what we can see is that the Syrian children are using a right profile, whereas the French children are using the left profile. So it seems that the profile is in agreement with their reading and writing habits. Interestingly, as you can see on the figure, at age 6, the directionality index is close to 0, which means that there is no profile that is preferred by the children. The explanation is that at age 6, children are still learning language at school, so their reading and writing habit does not yet influence the drawing behavior. Now, as far as the vertical oblique rule is concerned, a study by Wade has shown that this rule also varies according to cultural habits. In this study, American people with left-to-right reading habits and Arabic participants with right-to-left reading habits had to draw two houses, one near and the other far. As you can see on the pictures, the American participant used the oblique rule just as the Greek children of Bonotti did it. But the Arabic participant used the oblique rule in a reverse direction by drawing the near house on the left side of the page and the far house on the right, so as if the picture was to be read from right to left. Well, and last for this part, I'm going to talk about expressive drawing. What we know about expressive drawing is that children use specific strategies and specific cues to draw expressively. There is a very large literature on this domain, which can be broadly cut in two parts. One part concerns the drawing of happy and sad drawings, and the other part concerns the depiction of human emotions. As far as the first part is concerned, we know that drawing happy and sad drawing involves 3 different strategies that can be used separately or in combination. As you can see on the left figure, these strategies are literal expression, where children use human facial features to depict mood. The second strategy is called abstract expression. Typically, children modify the formal properties of their drawing, like size, so they draw bigger drawing to make happy, and smaller drawing to say that the drawing are sad. And the third strategy is content expression. In content expression, children use contextual cues to depict emotion. For instance, they draw a bright sun and fruits to depict happiness, or by contrast, they draw a tree without leaves to depict sadness. Well, studies have shown that American, French, and Greek children all use these strategies to draw expressively. On the other hand, the depiction of human emotions involve the use of 3 different graphic cues. These cues are facial cues, postural cues, and contextual cues. Again, the cues can be used separately or in combination with one another. These expressive cues have been observed in the drawing of basic emotion among French children. And more recently, they have been observed in the drawing of complex or social emotion by Bonotti and Misselidi in Greek children. For instance, pride was depicted through facial feature, an upward curving mouth, so a happy face, posture and expanded chest, and context, and the girl is carrying an award. So the question is, are these expressive strategies and graphic cues natural and universal to drawing behavior? Well, in our own studies, we have shown that size variation, which is typical of abstract expression, is not intuitive. On the contrary, size variation has to be learned as a code. What we have found is that French children aged 5 years do not change the size of their drawing of a tree to make it happy or sad. By contrast, from the age of 7 and in adults also, participants use size variation to depict emotions. So we suggest that the code has to be learned. In another study, we have shown that unlike French children, Moroccan children, aged 7 to 11, never change the size of their drawing of a tree to make it happy or sad. They make size variation, but not according to emotion. So it is as if the code was absent from this culture. As you can see on the figure, the Moroccan children use context cues and also facial cues to draw happy and sad trees, but they don't use 8 variation. By contrast, the French children use 8 variation. So, next part concerns the concluding remark. They are quite short. This is quite the end of my talk. So, short concluding remarks. In this talk, I have defended the view that drawing is a language that children learn by imitating the graphic schemas available in their culture. I have tried to illustrate this view with research studies from different countries, Greek studies, French studies, American studies, and so on, including some cross-cultural comparisons. I believe that a cross-cultural approach of drawing is important if you want to gain a more complete and maybe less egocentric understanding of drawing development. As we have seen it, there is variation in the way cultures value drawing behavior. Some cultures very much value artistic development and children's drawing activity. These cultures are mostly Asian cultures, like Chinese and Japanese people who direct the activity and teach children how to draw. By contrast, there are cultures that value children's drawing in the sense that children are encouraged to draw, and in the sense that we put their pictures on the wall at school or at home. But we believe that we do not need to direct the activity because drawing is a natural tendency, and if we direct the activity, we will limit their creativity. Finally, there are cultures in which drawing activity is quite absent. In Arabic cultures, some pictures are forbidden. Pictures of the self or pictures of God cannot be drawn, and children are not encouraged to draw. So, to my view, what may be interesting here for fundamental research is to ask why there is such variation across culture in the way they value artistic development or art behavior. And one key question is, what is the adaptative value of such differences? So thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Picard, we thank you for this excellent presentation. Are there any questions?
Delphine, thank you for a fantastic presentation, really interesting, and always lovely to see children's drawings and the errors they make, and even then they can be quite creative. On your final point, is I noticed in one of your earlier slides, and I think it was was it Arabic and French children, or was it Syrian and French children at 6 years? This one, yes.
Yes.
They start at the same baseline with no directionality, and then I guess from the start of formal education, when they're starting to learn to write, we see those differences increase. And then on your last slide, talking about the adaptive content, I wonder, is language, formal schooling, and the ways in which drawing connect up with, in the early years, the motor control required to produce written words, is that perhaps an effective ingredient in some of the changes here?
Yes, you're asking me the relation between writing and drawing.
Yes.
So it's true that in writing we know that starting point and starting direction, movement direction, change with age, and they change in the way that they conform. They get congruent with the directionality of the written language and reading directions. So first there is a natural tendency to use some starting point and starting directions, but then with the pressure of culture and learning, these graphic rules are changing and get congruent with the left to right or right to left reading mode.
Well, I fully agree that it's a language to be learned, but obviously it's not like natural language, because natural language is part of the evolved system of translating concepts into signs for the other. It's also a skill to be learned, because you have to learn to translate symbols into movements of the hand. So what are the constraints in learning this language that do not exist in learning, for example, natural language or other sorts of languages, such as, for example, mathematical language?
Could you repeat the last part of your question, please?
Ναι, θα μεταφράσω στη συνέχεια την ερώτηση για να την ακούσετε. Ναι. Okay. Well, it's certainly a language to be learned, but it has constraints that are not related to, for example, learning natural language, which is evolutionarily probably much older or much more integrated with the system of thought. This is also a skill to be learned, because you have to coordinate the movements of the hands with the symbols that exist in the mind. Mm-hmm. So what are the specific constraints in learning this language that do not exist, first of all, in learning the natural language, and then in learning other languages, such as the language of mathematics?
Yes, it's a hard question. Well, for me, drawing shares some similarity with verbal language, but the constraints are not so important. I mean that maybe it's easier for children to learn to draw than to learn language, because the relationship between graphic signatures and the referent are iconic, whereas in language it is only abstract relationship, so maybe it's more complex for the children. But I don't know if I am answering your question.
You know, for most of the people, the level of using language is much more advanced than the level of drawing.
Yes, maybe for I think that drawing is typical of childhood and then it disappears. It is as a first step to language, but then it is replaced with verbal language. We may have choose the option of communicating with drawing only, but it's not economic at all. So we have choose the other option of using verbal language, which is more economic. I think that drawing as a language and verbal language were two options selected by nature, and the second one has been chosen because it was more practical for our lives. But in some cultures, language is much more based on iconicity. For instance, Chinese characters, they are more like drawings than Greek language or other languages. So I think there is a continuum between graphic and abstract reference.
Professor Picard, thanks a lot for your presentation. I think that you offered us a new theoretical framework after the well-established proposal of Luquet. I would like to ask you, what's your opinion about the role of education? If we consider drawing as a non-verbal language that has to be learned, we should intervene and educate children in this effort.
Yes,
Thank you.
this is an interesting question. I think that given some experimental evidence, if you teach drawing skill, you improve drawing development and creativity. So if it's your goal, it's a good way to achieve it. I also think that there are close relationship between drawing and the first writing activity of children. What some studies show is that if you disconnect drawing and writing, children struggle writing words. But if you connect both, telling the child, for instance, you write a story, but if you cannot write the word, you draw the thing, and then there is no gap in the story. And by this way, we improve their written activity. So I think that drawing must not be disconnected at school from other important activity. Because at school, I don't know if it's the case in Greece, but in France, when children are learning to read and write, drawing is for babies. So you do the hard thing, and then if you have finished your work, you can go play, and you can draw if you want. But drawing is no more an important activity. It's just ludic and enjoyment.
That's the picture here too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay.
Yes, thank you too for the great talk. Well, when you ask children to draw something like tree and a house or an emotion, do you have also data about their conceptualization of space or of the emotion, or do you infer it from the drawing?
You mean when I analyze the drawing?
When in a study, when somebody asks a child to draw happiness or a happy person, are there any data how this child conceptualizes happiness in parallel, or is it inferred from the drawing?
Yes, we did a study in that perspective. We use a drawing task, happy and sad human beings. And the other task was to measure the child's understanding of the concept of basic emotions. There were told stories about a little boy, and it happened things to the boy. For instance, he has a cat and the cat has been lost. So we ask the child, how do you think the little boy is feeling? So the child has to say he's feeling sad because the cat is gone. So we measured the level of understanding of the basic emotion in children, and we compare this to their ability to depict emotion in the drawing. And we find that there was a parallel in the two developmental trajectories. And children who cannot conceptualize the emotion cannot draw it on their drawing. Which means that you need to understand the concept to depict it in a graphical way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks again.